It is really hot in the UK at the moment. I've had to shut all my windows and switch my fan off so the audio isn't completely screwed for this video. So there will be sweat. You will see me sweat, and you just have to deal with it. Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. So some of you guys remember, over a year ago now, I uploaded a video called Coming of Age Media, the Impact on Teen Culture, or something along those lines. And it did really well. It went down really well with you guys. It did decent on the views, and I didn't think it was a bad video at all, but I did end up taking it down. I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking that I took it down because I don't agree with anything I've said in it, or something I've said in it. Maybe there was a bad take in it. Not necessarily. I did take it down because my fake tan was bad in it. I wish, guys, I wish I wasn't so shallow, but the fake tan in that video is so bad, and I just could not have that be my imprint on the internet. So I did take it down, but I have been wanting to do sort of like an updated version of that video anyway. So I took it down a few months ago, and I thought, why don't I do the updated version now? So today I will be discussing coming of age media, mostly movies and TV shows, and there are going to be a few subjects which I'm going to cover. Obviously, sort of what is coming of age media, examples, etc. I'll also be discussing the depiction of toxic relationships, possible romanticisation of mental illness, representation, and also the male gaze, mostly in relation to the TV show Euphoria, and also why there is such an abundance of coming of age stories and films and TV shows set in high schools, but there are barely any stories about young adults. And just before I get into today's video, I would just like to thank today's sponsor, which is Function of Beauty. They very kindly let me pick out a few hair products, and the very unique thing about Function of Beauty is that you actually get to customize all of your products depending on what your hair goals are. So I picked up a shampoo, a conditioner, and also a hair mask, and you also personalize the product to your hair type as well. So I have very straight hair, and my hair is quite sort of medium in thickness, but my scalp can get quite dry, and when you're picking up your products you can choose 5 hair goals that you sort of want to reach. So the hair goals which I chose were deep condition, strengthen, color protection, volume, and anti-frizz. And also you get to pick a scent and a color. The scent I picked was nude peach, and I chose this very pretty sea foam green color. You can see it more on the hair mask. It's a very nice color. It's very Bethany Motor circa 2010, and I got to put my name on it too. It says Function of Jordan, and that really feeds into my main character individuality complex. And I've been using these products for just over a month now, and I actually haven't gone that down in them at all, so they last a really long time in the bottles. And not only have I noticed my hair looks better, it looks healthier, shinier, it also looks thicker. I've noticed it also feels better as well. It feels a lot healthier, and my scalp is a lot less dry as well. And because my hair is not only bleached, I also have extensions in too, so I'm very used to not only my scalp being literally super dry, but also my hair just feeling weak in general. And I do struggle to find shampoos and conditioners which work for me in general, just because I've got bleached hair and I have extensions. You know, it's difficult to find products which target all of my problems, which is why I love Function of Beauty, because you can customize it to all of your hair needs and hair goals. And I also love Function of Beauty products because they are vegan and cruelty free, and their products are free from any toxins, GMOs, sulfates, parabens, which is perfect for my hair because obviously you guys know it's bleached, and also it doesn't dry my extensions out. And also all of their products are dermatologically tested, so I know it's not going to irritate my scalp at all. And if you use my link, which will be in the description, you can get 20% off your first shampoo and conditioner set. So yeah, thank you again Function of Beauty for sponsoring today's video. The term coming of age can be very simply defined as the time in which you transition from a child to an adult. The term coming of age means different things to different people. Some people think that coming of age literally means when you turn 18, because you are now legally recognized as an adult. Also, different cultures have celebrations for when you come of age. Obviously there's bat and bar mitzvahs, there's quinceañeras, there's even sweet 16s would be considered a coming of age type of ceremony. Some people even believe you come of age when you lose your virginity. Some people believe that you come of age when you have that sort of life realization and you discover what your true purpose in life is. So as you guys can tell, the term coming of age means different things to different people. But when it comes to coming of age media, you know, films, TV shows, they are typically stories about teenagers, usually between the age of 16 to 18, but sometimes it can be a little bit younger. And coming of age has always been a fairly popular genre. One of the first ever coming of age films was Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean and Natalie Wood, and it was about the lives of like middle-class teenagers living in the suburbs. But the coming of age genre really did peak in the 1980s. There were so many really popular coming of age movies. A few examples are The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Stand By Me, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, etc. And although in my opinion coming of age did really peak in the 80s, there are still so many really popular coming of age movies to come since then. Some notable coming of age films are 10 Things I Hate About You, Bend It Like Beckham, Mean Girls, Dazed and Confused. And although some of these films did deal with serious issues, especially Bend It Like Beckham, the late 90s but mostly sort of the late 2000s was when the coming of age genre started to take itself a lot more seriously, and coming of age movies really began to step it up. There were some really critically acclaimed and very good either drama comedies or dramas, films like This Is England, City of God, Moonlight, Lady Bird, Call Me By Your Name, mid-90s, Diary of a Teenage Girl, Submarine, just to name a few. And in the 2000s there was really a rise of coming of age TV shows. TV shows in general in sort of mostly the early 2010s really began to step it up because streaming became really popular. So a lot more companies such as HBO Max and Netflix started investing more in TV shows. But before streaming services, some really popular coming of age TV shows were shows like Degrassi, Dawson's Creek, 90210, The OC, Secret Life of an American Teenager. And although these TV shows did tackle some very taboo topics, they were still very squeaky clean in my opinion. But then in 2007 the first season of Skins aired, and I personally think that Skins really reshaped the coming of age genre and sort of changed the trajectory of the coming of age genre. Not only did Skins handle some very taboo topics which not a lot of shows were talking about, such as mental illness, pregnancy, sex, alcohol, toxic relationships, toxic friendships, toxic family dynamics, but unlike any other coming of age show which came before Skins, Skins was not squeaky clean in the slightest. It was the direct opposite. Most of those characters looked like they smelled. Now, just because Skins wasn't PG like other coming of age shows doesn't mean that it didn't have its fair share of cringy moments. I think some of us can agree here that the whole character of Effie was extremely cringy, but obviously we all thought she was cool when we were 16, but now that we're adults we're like... And as I said earlier, I think that Skins really reshaped the coming of age genre. I think a big reason why coming of age shows were so afraid to not be PG was because it was really difficult to get shows like that greenlit. So after Skins, a lot of sort of non-PG coming of age TV shows became really popular. Shows like Euphoria, Sex Education, 13 Reasons Why, Scam, Misfits. And I do think that without Skins there would not be any Euphoria. You know, Skins walked so Euphoria could run. And some of you guys may be wondering, why is coming of age media so popular? How has it maintained its popularity over decades and decades? And I do think this is because coming of age stories, in my opinion, transcend age. Like, sure, the story you're watching is about a high school senior deciding what college they want to go to, but someone who has already finished college may be watching that for the nostalgia. Someone who is a high school senior in the exact same situation as them may be watching that film for someone to relate to. Maybe someone younger may be watching that film for guidance or to sort of get a feel of what to expect in the future. And even if you aren't the same age as the protagonist, even if if you aren't in the same sort of situation as the protagonist, there will be aspects of their personality or their life that you relate to, and it's nice to watch things that you can relate to. Whether it's mental health problems, toxic relationships, toxic friendships, a bad family dynamic, maybe you use humor as a coping mechanism, you have a slightly narcissistic personality, maybe you let people walk all over you. The list goes on. So there are a lot of coming of age stories that people can relate to, so they maintain their popularity. But also it is important to notice that not everybody sees themselves in coming of age stories. There definitely is an issue with representation, which I am going to elaborate more on later. Firstly, I want to discuss how different relationship dynamics are explored in coming of age media. There tends to be 3 different relationship dynamics which are represented: romantic relationships, friendships, and family dynamics, whether it be parents, siblings, or both. I'm going to be focusing mostly on toxic romantic relationships and how they can possibly be romanticized. There are multiple toxic relationships in coming of age media, and maybe this is because the writers want to teach the audience what to avoid when it comes to relationships, but mostly it's because toxic relationships make really good TV. But regardless of the writer's intentions, toxic relationships can very easily be romanticized, especially by a young and naive audience. Just to give a few examples of some toxic relationships, obviously we've got multiple from Skins: Tony and Michelle, Sid and Cassie, Effie and Cook, Effie and Freddie, Naomi and Emily, Aria and her Nancy teacher from Pretty Little Liars, Elena and Damon from The Vampire Diaries, every relationship in 13 Reasons Why, Rue and Jules from Euphoria, Maddie and Nate from Euphoria. And I do just want to preface that just because someone is in a toxic relationship doesn't necessarily mean that one of them is a bad person or that one of them is necessarily an abuser. Obviously there are examples of relationships where one of them is clearly the instigator and the abuser and the bad person. For example, Nate emotionally and physically abuses Maddie in Euphoria. But there are also relationships like Rue and Jules where neither of them are necessarily a bad person. They've both just got so many sort of personal struggles and things going on in their lives that they are not capable of maintaining a relationship with each other, and that doesn't make either of them toxic. It doesn't make either of them bad people. They just can't function in a healthy relationship together. The same as Sid and Cassie from Skins. They brought out the worst in each other. And this is on a slightly random note, but I feel like mostly teenagers do this, is they'll see a toxic relationship in a TV show and try and pin the blame on one person. I've noticed this mostly with Rue and Jules from Euphoria. I've seen so many bad takes on TikTok about Rue and Jules, mostly people saying that Jules is toxic and led Rue on. I do think this is because, you know, Rue is the protagonist and she's very likable, that everyone sort of jumps to blame Jules for everything that went wrong in their relationship. And it just baffles me that people think that Jules is the only toxic one when Rue put her entire recovery and sobriety into Jules. Like, Jules was the reason that she was staying sober, which is so unhealthy. You know, it's a ridiculous amount of pressure to put on one person, and I think that people who have never been in that type of situation where they're in a relationship with someone who has addiction problems or has a mental illness, unless you've been in a relationship like that, you will never understand. And if teenagers who are watching these shows have grown up in, you know, rocky households, divorced parents, parents that argue all the time, if they've never had sort of a healthy functioning relationship to look up towards, they will start looking for relationships to strive towards in these TV shows. And obviously there are sort of obvious toxic and abusive relationships like Maddie and Nate, and I really doubt that anybody wants a relationship like that because that isn't really romanticized or glamorized. But there are relationships like Rue and Jules or Sid and Cassie from Skins where the lines are a little bit more blurred, and you may want a relationship like that, and their relationships tend to get romanticized even though you can sort of see that they're very unhealthy. And from my personal experience, toxic relationships are extremely addictive because the lows are so low but the highs are so high that it feels great, and it almost makes up for the lows, or at least you think that in the moment, and then you look back and you're like, that was not worth it, obviously. That low to high can be very addictive, and I'm not saying that sort of morally grey or complicated relationships shouldn't be portrayed on TV. Especially when you're a teenager, it's very common to get yourself into toxic relationships because you don't actually know how to navigate relationships properly. But it would be nice if there were just some healthy relationships for teenagers and young adults to look up to, because when the only relationships that you're really seeing on screen are super toxic, it's just not great. And to be fair, I don't mind toxic relationships being portrayed on screen as long as the writers know that that relationship is toxic and knows that their viewers should not be striving towards a relationship like that. But there are just so many relationships on screen, it's not necessarily in coming of age stories, that sort of promote this like back and forth, on again, off again, high and low type of relationship as something to strive for. Elena and Damon from The Vampire Diaries, Aria and her Nancy teacher from Pretty Little Liars, and there's Call Me By Your Name. If you guys haven't seen Call Me By Your Name before, it's a film about a relationship between two people called Elio and Oliver, but Elio is 17 and Oliver is 21 or 22, I believe. And I first watched this film when it came out, and I think I was about 18, and I didn't see any problems with it because I was an 18-year-old. And I'm not saying this to sound patronizing, but now looking back as a 22-year-old woman, it just doesn't sit right with me, because the most maturing you do, in my opinion, the most maturing that you do is between the ages of 17 and 21, 22. So that whole relationship now gives me the creeps, and I don't think that young people should be getting into relationships with literal adults. Mental health and mental illness has always been a fairly taboo topic, and of course the conversation surrounding mental health has improved vastly, and so has sort of the representation on screen. But before the 2000s, there weren't that many examples of mental illnesses being portrayed on screen. The only ones that I could think of is Girl Interrupted and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and those are set in psychiatric hospitals. So there weren't really many stories about people who had mental illnesses but weren't in hospital full time. And once again, Skins was one of the first TV shows to portray mental illnesses. Cassie had anorexia, Tony had PTSD, Effie had depression. I know I'm talking about Skins a lot in this video, but Skins genuinely was a pioneer for discussing a lot of taboo topics that weren't sort of represented on screen before. But that is a very fine line between representation and romanticization. And although Skins was one of the first shows to portray mental illnesses and was really, you know, a game changer and a pioneer, I do think that it did not handle the issues that well, and I do think that it did lead to a lot of romanticization, mostly by young people and young girls. Just in case you guys haven't watched Skins before, Cassie and Effie are very much the fan favorites of the show, and both of them have mental health problems. Cassie has anorexia, Effie has depression, and I don't think that the way Skins handled mental illnesses was all bad. I do think that some of it was done okay, and I do think that some of it was accurate. But I do have a bone to pick with how much they romanticize these characters and how in turn romanticize their mental illnesses, and they very quickly became extremely popular on Tumblr. People would post all these aesthetic quotes and pictures of them. Cassie is very like head in the clouds, slightly sort of manic pixie dream girl. Some people find her annoying, but she is very likable. She's very pretty, her outfits are very cute and quirky. But the biggest problem I have with Skins' portrayal of eating disorders and anorexia was they displayed eating disorder behaviors which could very easily be mimicked. There was one scene where she goes and gets weighed at her eating disorder clinic, and she puts puts weights in her underwear so she can get discharged. And also there's a scene which a lot of people talk about as a very triggering scene. Obviously I'm not going to put it in. It's a scene where she is teaching Sid how she gets away with not eating anything. It's basically just a tutorial of how to trick people into thinking you're eating, and I've seen multiple people online say that this scene helped them hide their eating disorders. And I understand that so many teenagers suffer with eating disorders. I was one of them, but you need to be so careful with how you handle this mental illness because it can so easily be mimicked, especially when your target demographic is teenagers. And then there was Effie. Effie was probably the fan favorite of the show. She was the only character that was in 4 seasons. She was beautiful, she was cool, guys were obsessed with her, girls wanted to be her, and she also suffers with depression, as I said earlier, and she did attempt suicide in the 4th season. Now, not all parts of sort of the depiction of Effie's depression were all bad. One thing that I do really like that the show did, they showed all of the events which led up to her having depression, and her depression made a lot of sense. She saw her brother get hit by a car, her parents always arguing, and then she caught her mum cheating on her dad, and then her parents broke up, and then her mum became an alcoholic, and then she was tripping in the forest and knocked her mate out with a rock. You know, so her having depression makes a lot of sense, and as a viewer you can see that it makes a lot of sense. But the problem lies with all the male attention and how her love interests, Cook and Freddie, felt like they could save her. Skins sort of pushed this message that if you have a mental illness, there will be a cute boy that will want to save you. And that isn't necessarily the case. A lot of the time with mental illnesses, you tend to push the people who are closest to you away, and a lot of people don't want to be around you. And also that like having depression somehow makes you more mysterious and desirable. I really got that vibe from the whole Effie storyline. And on top of that, Effie's therapist ends up being some psychopath who's obsessed with her, who murders her boyfriend, and then her boyfriend's best friend murders him. And to be fair, I don't actually think that this stigmatized therapy in any way. Obviously it was just meant to be a dramatic storyline, but like it was so stupid. But just to end this segment on a positive note, I do want to talk about a show which I think portrayed mental illness really well, and that's Euphoria. In particular, Rue's bipolar disorder and sort of the depressive episodes in her bipolar disorder. Obviously, as everyone knows, I have a lot of qualms with Euphoria, male gaze, we'll get onto it later, but I do want to give credit where credit's due, and I think that they handled Rue's bipolar so well. None of it seemed romanticized, none of it seemed glamorous in the slightest. One scene which really sticks out to me is the scene where she is just so depressed that she doesn't even have any motivation to go up and pee, so she ends up having a kidney infection. It's very simple, but it's so relatable to a lot of people, and it just makes, you know, having depression look horrible, which it is. And as I was saying earlier, I was talking about Rue and Jules's toxic relationship. I do think that Euphoria portrayed really well how Rue's addiction and mental illness sort of leaked into all of her relationships and affected all of her relationships with other people. Now I want to talk about representation within the coming of age genre. I did speak about this in my last coming of age video, and it was discussed a lot in the comments as well. As most of you guys probably know, coming of age media is very white. And of course I do think there have been improvements. I do think that casts are getting more and more diverse, but also I am seeing a lot of TV shows just doing the bare minimum and casting one biracial actor or actress. One thing I've noticed that a lot of you guys are talking about in the comment section is just the lack of black female protagonists. And I don't know whether this is because people perceive black girls as older than they actually are because of sexualization. You know, they're seen as women even though they are still children / teenagers. Whether it's misogyny and racism racism, whether it's a mix of both, and even if a cast of characters is diverse, sometimes you'll look into the crew or the writing team or the showrunners and they will be all white, maybe bar one person. And in my opinion, if you are going to have a diverse cast of characters, you have to have a diverse writing team who can write POC experiences accurately. I just feel like if you have an all-white crew and an all-white writing team but a diverse cast of characters, it just comes across as very performative to me. But I would love to know what you guys think. There are very rarely plus-size characters in coming of age media. The only show that I can think of is My Mad Fat Diary. I rarely ever see disabled characters on screen as well, apart from maybe does the Bratz movie count as coming of age? Because Dylan was deaf, so that's some disabled representation that I've seen in the Bratz movie. But one thing I do want to touch on is tropes relating to diversity and representation, if that makes sense. So I just want to talk about two tropes which I've seen and they really get on my nerves. The first one I want to talk about is the Muslim character takes off her hijab for her white boyfriend trope. I haven't seen this that often recently, I don't think. And of course I understand that there are Muslim women who choose not to wear a hijab, that choose to remove their hijab later in their life, but hijabi characters are very few and far between. So when it starts to become a really common trope that the hijabi character will take off her hijab for her white boyfriend, it just doesn't sit right with me because it's the only representation that we're seeing. Another trope I really don't like, which is to do with LGBTQ+ representation, is the jock who bullies the gay guy because he's secretly gay and has a crush on said gay guy. And I know that some gay men do struggle with their sexuality so much that they resort to hypermasculinity and even bullying other gay men, but this storyline is so common that it's actually jarring. And like I said earlier, if your only representation of gay people is this and not anything else, it's not good. It's not good. And what makes it even worse is this closeted jock will bully the openly gay boy in school so badly, even beat him up at some point, and then they'll end up in a relationship. All of his past abusive behaviour is just swept under the rug and everybody just forgets about it. And this relationship ends up being really romanticised, and I just don't think that we should be teaching teenagers that it's okay to get into a relationship with someone who previously bullied you or even beat you up, because if they were capable of that before your relationship, then you do not know what they're capable of in a relationship. The last thing I want to discuss in this video is the male gaze. What a shock. I know I talk about the male gaze in a majority of my videos, but it just always comes up somehow. But I think it's really important to discuss the male gaze in relation to coming of age media, because a majority of coming of age movies and TV shows are either written or directed by men. But of course this isn't always a problem. One example could be the film Moonlight, which is about a young black gay man coming to terms with his sexuality whilst also struggling with his mother who's an addict. It's directed by Barry Jenkins, who is a black man who has said that his mother has struggled with addiction, and it was based off of a memoir, I believe, by Terrell Alvin McCraney, who is a black gay man whose mother also struggled with addiction. So it makes sense for it to be based off of his memoir and to be directed by Barry Jenkins. But when you are writing or directing a story with female protagonists, the male gaze becomes glaringly obvious, mostly through how these characters are sexualized. Just before I get into this, if you guys don't know what the male gaze is, I know most of you guys do, but just in case you guys are new, it was coined by Laura Mulvey, I believe, and it is defined as the act of depicting women in the world in the visual arts and in literature from a masculine heterosexual perspective that presents and represents women as sexual objects for the pleasure of the heterosexual male viewer. So basically you can just think of the camera as a man's eye, so you are seeing everything from the perspective of a heterosexual male. So I want to talk about the male gaze in relation to Euphoria, because as much as I enjoy the show, I do have a lot of bones to pick with it, and also I feel quite conflicted in my criticism, so I would love to know what you guys think. If you guys didn't know, the show Euphoria is written and directed by Sam Levinson, who's a man. He also wrote and directed Malcolm and Marie, Assassination Nation, I cannot say that, Assassination Assassination Nation. And Euphoria is a very female character centered show. There are male characters like Nate and McKay and Fezco, but Fezco doesn't even get his own episode. But there are 5 main female characters. There's Rue, Jules, Cassie, Maddie and Kat, and I guess you could include Lexi in there as well, but she doesn't get her own episode. And all of these female characters, apart from Lexi, are so sexualized, and I understand that the male characters are kind of sexualized to an extent. Mostly with Nate, it's related to sort of his back and forth with his sexuality, but there are multiple extremely explicit sex scenes with the female characters, and I don't think that all of them are super necessary. And the reason I feel conflicted about this is because I understand that Euphoria wanted to portray sort of these taboo topics and sort of teenage life in a very unfiltered and uncensored way. And I can understand why some of those scenes were put in there. For example, the scene between Cassie and McKay, how boys are so influenced by, but I did not see all of them as necessary or adding much to the plot. And I do understand that sex is a big part of these characters' lives. Maddie presents herself as this sort of male fantasy to impress her boyfriend and to gain more power. Cassie gets pressured into a lot of situations. And also all of the actresses in Euphoria are over 18, and there was an intimacy coordinator on set. But I just think the very blatant sexualization of characters who are meant to be in high school just doesn't sit right with me. And I understand that teenagers have sex. I started having sex when I was a teenager, but surely there are other ways which they could have gone about this, especially with Kat's storyline. She finally feels comfortable and confident in her body. She almost overcomes fat phobia in a way, but that's because she started posting explicit videos of herself on the hub. She finally felt attractive because she was gaining male attention and she was sexualizing herself. And I don't want to speak too soon, maybe they'll develop the storyline more, I don't know. The whole storyline again just felt like that they were sexualizing her when there are so many other ways that she could have come to love her body and felt confident in herself. But again, maybe this is just part of a longer journey, so I don't want to speak too soon. And maybe again, I'm overthinking this, but I think the most frustrating part about Euphoria is they could have so easily aged the characters up. It did not have to be set in high school. They could have set all of that in college. They could have set all of that with all the characters in their early 20s. Because from my personal experiences, and a lot of other personal experiences too, I experienced, I'm saying experience so much.
I think you should experience it. You always say I want to experience things, but I don't think you actually want to experience things because you would experience it if you wanted to experience things. I don't know what you're talking about.
I went through a majority of those experiences in the shows as a young adult between the ages of 18 and now 22. And you know, of course, if it was set in college, it still would have been very male gazy, but I don't think it would have been as bad as sort of blatantly sexualizing characters who are meant to be in high school. It would have made it a little bit less weird, and it probably would have made it more relatable to a lot of people. And this also sort of brings me onto the topic, just before I finish this video, of why is there such a lack of TV shows about young adults? It's either a TV show is about high schoolers or it's about divorcees. There's literally nothing in between. And I find it especially frustrating because the storyline in Euphoria could have easily been aged up to characters in college. And it's not like young adult TV shows aren't good. 2 of my favourite shows from last year were about young adults. Normal People, even though some of that is based in high school, a majority of it is based in uni, and I May Destroy You, which is easily one of the best TV shows I've ever watched. I just don't understand so many writers' obsessions with making stories about teenagers when it's such a saturated market as it is. Again, maybe it's just because it's a cash cow and it's easy money to make, and you know, their target demographic is teenagers who spend like a lot of time on Netflix. Yeah, there's such a lack of TV shows about young adults, and I don't know about anybody else, but I did a majority of my evolving between the ages of 18 and 22. But yes, that's this video done. I'm gonna have to stop filming now because I'm literally never sweated so much in my life, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I worked so hard on this script, you don't even realise. But yeah, no, let me know if you guys have any sort of video suggestions. I'm running kind of low on topics at the moment. But yeah, I will see you guys soon for a new video. Bye!